It was in 2003 that Luke Mitchell murdered his girlfriend, Jodi Jones, who was 14, in woods in Dalkeith. He was convicted in 2005 and sentenced to life imprisonment with a possibility of parole after 20 years. But when he became before the parole board last year, they decided not to release him. Today, he is challenging that decision in court. His argument is that the procedure followed was unfair because a particular report was not taken into account. However, the parole board argues that his case is fundamentally misconceived and it would have no practical difference in any case because another review of his parole is due in the next couple of months. The judge, Lady Haldane, said she will issue her decision in writing at a later date.
Welcome back to the channel. Before we get into the shadows of Roan's Dyke, make sure you're following the journey on all my socials linked below, and definitely check out the 212 link in the bio for the exclusive deep dive resources on this case and others. We're leaving no stone unturned today. We're digging into the files, the forensic gaps, and the secrets the Scottish legal system tried to bury. This is the full story of Luke Mitchell, start to finish. Let's get into the evidence. June 30th, 2003. Dalkeith, Midlothian. The sun was setting on a humid Monday evening in a quiet town on the outskirts of Edinburgh. 14-year-old Jodi Jones, a vibrant girl who expressed herself through art and music, left her home in Easthouses at 4:50 p.m. She shared a kiss with her mother, Judith, and said, "That's me off now, Mum." She was heading out to meet her boyfriend, Luke Mitchell, via Roan's Dyke, a wooded shortcut locals called the V. It was a walk she had done 100 times. She had no way of knowing she was walking straight into a nightmare. By 10 p.m., the silence from Jodi was deafening. She hadn't shown up at Luke's house, and she wasn't answering her phone. A search party was quickly assembled in the pitch black, including Jodi's grandmother, Alice Walker, her sister's boyfriend, Stephen Kelly, and 14-year-old Luke Mitchell. They gathered at the entrance to Roan's Dyke. Within minutes of stepping onto the path, the dynamic changed forever. Luke led the group toward a specific, high stone wall with a V-shaped notch. He climbed over, stared into the dark, and alerted the others. What the search party saw was beyond comprehension. Jodi had been brutally murdered. Her throat was slit, and she had suffered multiple, horrific stab wounds. The police would later describe it as the most ruthless and gruesome crime scene in Scottish history. The level of violence suggested a frenzied, desperate attack, yet strangely, the surrounding area didn't show the massive amount of blood splatter one might expect from such a violent struggle. Before he was even a legal adult, 14-year-old Luke Mitchell was taken in for questioning. For 14 exhausting hours, he was interrogated by seasoned detectives without a lawyer present. Throughout the grueling questioning, Luke remained remarkably calm. The police interpreted this lack of tears as coldness and sociopathy, rather than the profound shock of a traumatized child. Almost immediately, a sensational narrative began to take root. Prosecutors noted that Jodi's devastating injuries bore a passing resemblance to the infamous 1947 Black Dahlia murder in Los Angeles. They alleged that Luke was obsessed with the cold case and had actively recreated it. Pathologists would later argue that the similarities were superficial at best, but it didn't matter. The media ran with it. The narrative was cemented. This wasn't just a murder. It was a dark, calculated ritual. When the trial began in late 2004, the longest for a single accused in Scottish history, it quickly became clear that this was as much a trial of subculture as it was of physical evidence. Luke Mitchell was a goth. He wore long black trench coats and listened to Marilyn Manson. The prosecution used his music, his clothes, and his teenage artwork to paint him as a monster. They repeatedly highlighted a knife pouch he owned, which had the numbers 666 and Jodi's birth and death years scrawled on it, alongside a quote, "The finest day I ever had was when tomorrow never came." To the prosecution, this was a blatant confession. To his supporters, it was just morbid teenage angst blown wildly out of proportion. A central pillar of the prosecution's case was a missing green Parka jacket. Witnesses claimed they saw Luke wearing it on the day of the murder, but the coat vanished without a trace. The police argued that Luke had burned it in a log burner at his home to destroy crucial forensic evidence. Neighbors testified that the fire in the Mitchell family log burner was unusually hot and smelled heavily of chemicals on the night of the murder. However, here is the first unturned stone. Despite sifting through the ashes, police never recovered a single metallic remnant of a zipper, brass button, or steel stud. A wood fire hot enough to destroy a jacket cannot vaporize metal. Luke's mother, Corinne, insisted he never even owned that specific jacket, leading to her being charged with perjury. The charges were eventually dropped, but her credibility as his primary alibi was severely damaged. She had told the court he was home cooking dinner when Jodi was killed, but Luke's older brother, Shane, complicated things. Shane testified that he had been watching pornography that evening, something he claimed he only ever did when the house was completely empty. The prosecution used this to suggest Luke was out committing the murder, and his mother was lying to protect him. The prosecution also relied heavily on their star eyewitness, Andrina Bryson. She testified that she saw a couple standing near the path at around 4:55 p.m. on the night of the murder, identifying the boy as Luke Mitchell. Yet, her initial description to the police didn't match Luke perfectly, and critics have long argued that her identification was heavily influenced by the relentless media coverage of Luke's face in the months leading up to the trial. But the most shocking and enduring mystery of the Jodi Jones case is the absolute void of forensic evidence. Despite the frenzied nature of the attack, there was zero DNA from Luke Mitchell found on Jodi's body. There was no blood from Jodi found on Luke's remaining clothes, his shoes, or anywhere in his home. Most critically, a condom was found near Jodi's body containing fresh semen, meaning it was left within 24 hours of the murder, and it absolutely did not match Luke Mitchell. Furthermore, DNA from at least 6 other unknown males was found on Jodi's clothing during later reviews. To this day, those profiles have never been matched to a suspect, and the defense argues they were entirely ignored by a police force suffering from tunnel vision. On January 21, 2005, relying entirely on circumstantial evidence and character assassination, the jury returned a majority guilty verdict. Luke Mitchell, then just 16 years old, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. He was led away in a security van while protesters and supporters violently clashed outside the courthouse. He has not breathed free air since that day. For years, the case lay dormant, seemingly finalized by the courts. But in 2021, the documentary, Murder in a Small Town, blew the case wide open again. It brought in independent private investigators who pointed out massive, glaring flaws in the original police work. They highlighted alternative suspects, known as Suspect Mark and Suspect James, men with histories of violence who were in the area that night but were never fully investigated once the police locked onto Luke. Public opinion began to shift dramatically. Then, in 2022, a devastating claim emerged. A whistleblower alleged that Police Scotland had quietly destroyed nearly 90% of the original forensic samples from the crime scene. This wasn't just a clerical error, it was a death blow to Luke's chances of a modern DNA exoneration. Even if advanced technology could finally identify the unknown males on Jodi's clothing, the physical evidence no longer existed to be tested. By 2024, Luke Mitchell had served his 20-year punishment part, making him legally eligible for parole. However, his first bid for freedom was immediately rejected. The parole board claimed they could not adequately assess his risk to the public because he adamantly refused to admit guilt. In the eyes of the system, a prisoner who maintains their innocence is a prisoner who hasn't been rehabilitated. In early 2025, a new, intense legal battle commenced. Luke's legal team discovered that the parole board was using secret, serious offender liaison service reports to keep him incarcerated. These SOLS reports were heavily redacted, and unbelievably, even Luke's own defense lawyers were barred from seeing the full versions. Luke sued, claiming this violated his fundamental human rights and created a trial in the shadows. In February 2025, High Court Judge Lady Haldane issued her ruling on the judicial review. While she acknowledged the intense frustration of the defense team, she ruled that the parole board had acted lawfully. She stated the board was within its rights to withhold damaging information to protect the public. The legal door to his release remained firmly locked. As of April 2026, Luke Mitchell is 37 years old. He has spent more than half of his entire life behind the high walls of HMP Shotts, still maintaining his absolute, unwavering innocence. He has publicly stated he would rather die in a prison cell than confess to a brutal crime he did not commit. A petition with tens of thousands of signatures sits waiting, calling for an independent public inquiry, but the Scottish government has refused to budge. The murder of Jodi Jones is no longer just a tragic true crime story. It is a battle over the soul of the Scottish legal system. Was it justice served against a cold, calculating killer, or was it a catastrophic tragedy compounded by an unforgivable police mistake? With the evidence destroyed and the real killer potentially still walking free, the dark woods of Roan's Dyke keep their secrets, and the desperate search for the truth continues.
Year-old boyfriend at the time, Luke Mitchell, was prime suspect from the beginning. And as I say, today I'm joined by author Scott Forbes and case expert Dr. Sandra Lean. Dr. Sandra, you've written a book called Innocence Betrayed, which is TS as opposed to innocence, and I like that play on words. And Scott, you've just published a new book, which is The Long Walk to Justice? I think that's correct, isn't it? And and I think it's fair to say that both of you are in no doubt whatsoever that Luke Mitchell was wrongly imprisoned, and it's both an injustice to both Jodi and Luke.
Absolutely.
Right. First of all, let's go to you then, Scott. Again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Why did you write this book, Scott?
So, Sonia, I've been wanting to write this book for some years. Myself and Dr. Lean have spoken about it for 10 years maybe. Only because I've seen it from a different perspective to others. I'm from the area, I know the mining villages, and listen, my involvement to the case for day one has been frustrating, very frustrating. Channel 5 done a great programme. The Murder in a Small Town was brilliant. Sandra's book's fantastic, factually, and I just thought there was something missing. There was something missing that had to be said. It wasn't being permitted to be said on television in Sandra's book. So I decided during COVID, I was just it was time to eventually put everything out.
It's the thing is that many experts now conclude that there is something very desperately wrong with this case and the conclusion and conviction of Luke. And Sandra, you were both you and Scott were both in the Channel 5 documentary. And as anybody who knows me knows, I can be highly critical of the output from legacy media, but it is an excellent two-part documentary that I highly recommend. It's on the iPlayer of Channel 5. It was actually repeated again this week because it's vital. And Sandra, one of the things that I think throws people about this case is that there was no forensic evidence linking Luke to the crime scene, but there was DNA from other people. Could you tell us more about that?
That was probably one of the most shocking. Once we got access to the case papers, now you have to remember this is 5, 6 years, 7 years actually after the murder, when we got access to the case papers and the forensic results. Now, I was an ordinary mum. I had no knowledge of all this stuff. I had to go and study everything. And I'm looking at these DNA results going, that cannot be correct. And it was. Nothing of Luke at the crime scene, on the body, nothing of Jodi in his home, on his clothing, nothing. And then you find DNA from others on the clothing at the crime scene. The condom, the used condom found within yards of the body, both the appeal court and the SCCRC thought this was of no significance. There's a 14-year-old girl stripped naked, and there's a used condom with what they called fresh semen. That's not my words, that's theirs. And they thought that was of no consequence. It blew my mind. I've never experienced anything like it.
And we are talking about a level of savagery. The mutilation of poor Jodi looked ritualistic. Her hands were tied behind her back using her own trousers. She'd obviously put up a fight. Her throat had been cut multiple times. It was an absolute bloodbath. Anybody involved would have been covered. There's no question about it, because blood spurt does that. And obviously one of the DNA matches was Stephen Kelly, which was Jodi's sister's boyfriend. And at trial, they said that Jodi had borrowed her sister's t-shirt, her sister's boyfriend's t-shirt that night, and that was the explanation for that. But the other interesting thing that I find about this is that you actually had a direct communication with somebody who had shown up, Scott, at your home the day after, Mark Kane. Tell us about that.
Well, genuinely, Mark Kane could have been written out of this